The night my father told me not to come back, I was not surprised. It was a Thursday in early April, 8:14 p.m., and my parents were standing in my brother's kitchen acting like I was the problem because I had asked one simple question. Who is still sending documents under my review format after I had already told everyone to stop? Nobody answered that right away. My brother kept wiping down an already clean counter. My mother folded and unfolded a dish towel. My father looked at me with the kind of expression he used whenever he wanted to make it clear that I was making things difficult for everyone. Then he said, very calmly, "You know what, Marin? If this is how you're going to be, maybe step away from the family for a while." I remember nodding once. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. But because by then I had already spent too many years being useful to people who only liked me when I was fixing something for them. So I picked up my handbag, said, "All right," and walked out. I did not argue. I did not remind them that I had spent the last 4 years quietly keeping my brother's business records clean enough to survive inspections, lender reviews, and contractor disputes. I did not mention the insurance certificates I had chased down, the permit logs I had rebuilt, or the payment trails I had corrected after midnight because he could never seem to keep the files straight. I did not mention that my father had called me at 6:52 that same morning asking me to review a vendor agreement before he signed it. I just left. When I got to my car, I sat there with the door closed and the engine off. The parking lot lights reflected on the windshield. My hands were steady, which told me I had expected this long before it happened. At 8:21 p.m., I opened my phone and typed a note. Date, time, location, who was present, exact wording used. I always document important conversations while they are still fresh. That habit has saved me more than once. At 8:27 p.m., my brother texted, "You're overreacting again." At 8:31 p.m., my mother texted, "Your father is under stress. Let this go." At 8:36 p.m., my father sent the one that mattered. "If you can't support this family without turning everything into a compliance issue, then maybe don't involve yourself at all." I read that once, then again. Then I went home and did exactly what he asked. By 10 p.m., I had written a formal withdrawal notice. By 10:43 p.m., I had removed my review language from every shared template they still had access to. By 11:18 p.m., I had sent one short email to my brother, my father, their lender contact, and the outside bookkeeper. Effective immediately, I am no longer reviewing, organizing, advising on, or informally supporting any business, property, lender, vendor, permit, compliance, or documentation matters connected to Mercer Residential Group or related family holdings. Please do not use my name, language, file structures, or prior review materials going forward. That was it. No threat, no speech, no anger. By the next morning, everything they had been hiding behind was visible. My name is Marin Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and at the time this happened, I worked in healthcare compliance operations for a private hospital network outside Raleigh, North Carolina. If you're listening from somewhere tonight, tell me where you're watching from. One word for this story is simple: boundaries. And if you like quiet justice stories where nobody has to scream for the truth to land, subscribe to the channel. I mean that sincerely. In my family, I was never the favorite. I was the reliable one, which sounds like a compliment until you live inside it long enough to understand what it really means. Reliable meant I answered my phone. Reliable meant I caught mistakes before they became expensive. Reliable meant I noticed details other people ignored. Reliable meant that when something needed to be corrected quietly, everyone called me. But publicly, my work was always described like it was a small, slightly annoying personality trait. My father liked to call it your paperwork brain. My younger brother Nolan called it Marin doing her form thing. My mother would say, "She means well, she just gets so serious." What none of them said out loud was that my seriousness was the only reason half their messes had not turned into consequences years earlier. I work in compliance. Most people hear that word and think it means rules for the sake of rules. It doesn't. What it really means is documentation, timing, signatures, exposure, process, audit trails, and knowing exactly what can go wrong when people decide details do not matter. At work, that skill is respected. At home, it was convenient. The pattern started small. About 7 years ago, when Nolan first began buying and renovating older homes, he was full of confidence and almost no structure. He knew how to talk to clients. He knew how to make a room look expensive. He knew how to promise timelines that sounded reassuring. What he did not know was how to maintain records. He mixed personal and project expenses, saved contracts under random file names, forgot to collect updated insurance certificates from subcontractors, let change orders happen over text message with no formal approval trail, assumed permits would work themselves out. The first time he asked for my help, it sounded temporary. Just look over this one file for me. Just tell me if this wording is okay. Just help me sort this invoice issue out. And because he was my brother, I did. I corrected a vendor packet one Sunday afternoon because he had sent the wrong payment terms to a flooring contractor. I rebuilt a property expense summary after he mixed renovation receipts with fuel charges and a family vacation rental deposit. I created a clean file naming structure after he nearly sent an unsigned scope sheet to a private lender. I explained, more than once, why we agreed on the phone is not documentation. Every time I fixed one problem, another one appeared. My father saw that and decided it meant I should be involved more, not less. He had always cared about presentation. He liked things to look established, respectable, controlled. My brother's business gave him something new to be proud of, and my work made that business appear more stable than it actually was. So little by little, my role stopped being occasional help and became silent infrastructure. My father would call and say things like, "Nolan just needs a quick review before he sends this." Quick review usually meant 40 minutes minimum. My mother would forward me scanned notices without context and ask, "Does this matter?" Usually it did. Nolan would send me photos of signed pages from his truck and ask me to make it look organized. That became a family phrase, actually. Make it look organized. Not build a proper system. Not understand the process. Not learn the requirements. Just make it look organized. And for too long I did. Part of that was habit. Part of it was guilt. Part of it was the very old family rule that if I was capable of fixing something, then refusing to fix it made me selfish. I learned that rule young. Nolan was always the one who needed room, grace, second chances, understanding. He was good with people. He was not a details person. He was doing his best. I was the one expected to compensate for whatever that meant in practical terms. If he forgot something, I was supposed to remember it. If he mishandled something, I was supposed to smooth it out. If I objected, I was told not to be difficult. The strange thing is, they genuinely did not think they were using me. They thought they were including me. That silence after certain comments told me more than the comments themselves. For example, one Sunday dinner about a year before everything finally broke, my father was telling friends how proud he was that Nolan's company had become so professional. I let him finish before answering. Then I asked, "What exactly do you think made it professional?" He looked confused. Nolan laughed and said, "Here we go." And my mother gave me that look that meant do not ruin the evening. So I let it go. What I did not say was that 3 days earlier I had stayed up until 12:40 a.m. rebuilding Nolan's contractor compliance folder because 2 insurance certificates had expired, 1 W, 9 was missing, and a draw request package had gone out with inconsistent totals. That was my role in the family. Invisible when things looked good. Essential when things started slipping. The person who made weak systems appear stronger than they were. And I might have kept doing it longer than I should have if Nolan had not started using my actual work product more openly. That was the part one could not ignore. It began with file templates. I recognized my formatting in a lender packet he showed my father one afternoon. Same structure. Same review notes removed. Same sequencing. My language, cleaned up just enough to look like his. Then I saw one of my internal checklist phrases copied into a contractor onboarding document. Then a vendor email forwarded to me by mistake still contained wording I had written for a completely different risk summary 6 months earlier. I noticed because good documentation leaves fingerprints. Mine did. I brought it up quietly the first time. Nolan shrugged and said, "It's not that deep. I just used your version because it made sense." My father said, "Your family. Why are you acting like this is intellectual property?" That sentence stayed with me because it explained everything. To them, if I created something useful, it belonged to the family by default. My training, my judgment, my wording, my caution, my time, all of it was communal the moment it helped them. But the responsibility was still mine when something went wrong. That is where the story really starts. Not with the dinner where I was told to step away. Not even with the withdrawal notice. It starts with one redevelopment file, one lender package, and one question I asked after noticing my name was still being used in ways I had never approved. And once I asked it, the whole structure started to crack. The file that changed everything involved 3 small rental homes on the east side of Raleigh and a refinancing plan Nolan kept describing as straightforward. It was not straightforward. He wanted to roll short-term renovation debt into a longer private lending arrangement, finish improvements on 2 of the properties, lease all 3 at higher rates, and then use the stabilized value to position himself for a larger line of credit the following year. That plan depended on one thing: clean records, not good intentions, not charm, not family confidence, clean records. The lender wanted contractor agreements, permit history, proof of completed work, insurance documentation, rent projections, tax records, entity information, and a clear payment trail. Nothing unusual. Any serious lender would have asked for the same. Nolan had pieces of it, but not in a form anyone could defend. Some invoices were saved as phone screenshots. 2 contractor certificates had expired. 1 permit closeout had never been uploaded. The payment summary totals did not match the bank activity. 1 scope revision existed only in text messages. And the property expense sheet included at least 6 charges that should never have been there, including furniture for a staged showing and a personal hotel stay tied to nothing in the project file. I knew all of that because I was the one who cleaned it up the first time. He brought me the file on a Saturday afternoon in January and said, "I just need help making it presentable." That word again. Presentable. I told him presentable was not the same thing as supportable. He rolled his eyes and said, "You know what I mean." I didn't know what he meant. He wanted the appearance of order without the discipline required to create it honestly. Still, I reviewed the file. I built a clean folder structure. I separated contractor documents by active and expired. I created a funding support checklist. I flagged the missing permit closeout. I marked every unsupported expense in yellow. I wrote one note in plain language at the top of the summary sheet. Do not submit until unsupported charges are removed and certificates are current. I remember the exact wording because I read it twice before saving the file. That should have been the end of my involvement. Instead, Nolan started acting as if my review meant approval. He told my father, Marin went through it. We're basically good. That was not what I had said. When I corrected him, he waved his hand and said, "You always get stuck on wording." He said that in front of my mother, who immediately added, "He just means you helped." That was the problem. In my family, the difference between helped and approved was treated like a mood issue, not a legal and financial distinction. But in the real world, wording matters. My actual job required that kind of precision every day. At the hospital network, my team handled documentation controls across multiple departments. We tracked policy acknowledgement, vendor access records, audit response files, retention schedules, and system permissions. If a document had my sign-off attached, it meant something specific. It meant I had reviewed the material against actual requirements, not family optimism. That training shaped the way I saw everything at home. When Nolan said, "Can I tell the lender my compliance person reviewed the package?" I told him no. Not maybe. Not later. No. I was not his compliance person. I was not attached to his business. I was not authorizing anything. He laughed when I said that. Then he used almost those exact words anyway. I found out 2 weeks later. The lender contact was a woman named Sheila Benton. I had spoken to her once before on speakerphone when Nolan needed clarification on document sequence for a prior request. I had explained the checklist logic, and that should have been the end of it. Instead, Sheila emailed Nolan with me copied by mistake on a follow-up thread. "Thanks for confirming your documentation consultant reviewed the revised packet." Once the insurance updates are added, we should be able to move to final discussion. I read that once, then again. Documentation consultant. Reviewed. Confirmed. None of that was true in the way it had been presented. I called Nolan immediately. He answered on the fourth ring with that distracted voice he used when he already knew he had done something he would later call a misunderstanding. Why did Sheila Benton just refer to me as your documentation consultant? He was quiet for a second. Then he said, because that's basically what you are. No, it isn't. Marin, relax. Did you tell her I reviewed the revised packet? You looked at the file. I reviewed a draft and flagged major deficiencies. I did not approve submission. He exhaled like I was making his day harder. You always make everything sound more serious than it is. I documented the time. 2:16 p.m. Then I asked the next question carefully. Did you remove the unsupported charges before sending the packet? Another pause. Not long, but long enough. We adjusted most of it. That's not what I asked. He let me sit in that silence for 2 seconds before saying, Dad said the furniture counted because it was for leasing. I closed my eyes. Staging furniture might be a business expense in the right context, but that was not the issue. The issue was that the documentation trail was weak, the categorization was inconsistent, and my flagged notes had been treated like optional suggestions. I said, do not attach my name to anything else. He said, you're being dramatic. I said, no, I'm being clear. Then I sent an email. Not emotional. Not long. Effective immediately, I am not reviewing, advising on, certifying, or otherwise participating in document preparation for this lending package. Please do not represent me as having approved any materials, revised or otherwise. I copied only Nolan. That was my mistake. Because once a family gets used to informal labor, they treat boundaries like tone problems instead of actual decisions. That same night my father called and opened with, "What is wrong with you lately?" I let him finish before answering. He said Nolan was under pressure, lenders expected flexibility, and I needed to stop acting like every family matter was an internal audit. I said my name was used in connection with a packet I did not approve. His answer came back immediately. So what? You did review it. Not in the way he presented. That silence told me more than his next sentence did. Because when he finally spoke, he did not ask whether my concern was valid. He asked whether I could just let it go until funding closed. That was the family position in one line. Not, were you misrepresented? Not, was your work reused improperly? Not, are there real risks here? Just, can you please keep protecting us until we get what we want? I said no. My father went quiet in that controlled way he used before saying something meant to sound reasonable. Sometimes, he said, being part of a family means not formalizing every little thing. But what they called formalizing, I called recording reality accurately. And reality was simple. My brother's business looked more organized than it was because I had spent years filling the gaps. My father liked the image of a growing family operation while privately relying on me to keep its weak points from showing. My mother wanted everyone to stay pleasant long enough to pretend the structure underneath was stable. I was the structure underneath, not the face, not the praise, not the story they told in public. The structure. The final warning came from someone outside the family. 2 days after the call with my father, I had lunch with Teresa Holloway. She had been my mentor for nearly 4 years by then, and she had the rare ability to listen without interrupting and then say exactly the sentence you were hoping not to hear because you already knew it was true. I explained the lender thread, the copied language, and the way Nolan kept blurring draft review with professional endorsement. Teresa stirred her tea once and said, "Naomi." I corrected her automatically. "Marin." She smiled. "Sorry, Marin. You already know this, but I'm going to say it plainly. If your name or professional identity is being used to create confidence in a file you do not control, you are no longer helping. You are functioning as borrowed credibility." Borrowed credibility. That phrase landed hard, because that was exactly what had been happening. My systems, my tone, my caution, my reputation for precision. All of it had become borrowed credibility attached to files I did not own, decisions I did not make, and risks I could not fully monitor. Teresa said one more thing before we left that lunch. If you wait until they understand your boundary emotionally, you'll wait forever. Set it operationally. That became the sentence I carried home. Set it operationally. So I did. I stopped taking verbal requests. I stopped reviewing screenshots by text. I stopped answering quick question calls in the evening. I moved every family-related document still on my laptop into a locked archive folder. I created a dated list of every template, checklist, review sheet, and tracking structure I had built for Nolan's business over the years. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A revised lender packet had been saved in a shared folder using my review naming style. Not similar to mine. Mine, same sequence, same notation, same revision logic, same date format. Someone had taken my old framework and kept using it after I had already said no. That was when I knew the problem was no longer family habit. It had become active disregard. I took screenshots, saved copies, documented timestamps. Then I asked Nolan one simple question in writing. Was my review language or file structure used in any packet sent after my withdrawal email on January 18th? He did not answer the question. He called instead. I let it ring. Then came the text. Can you not do this right now? We're close. Close to what I thought. Funding? Exposure? Collapse? I did not respond. An hour later, my mother called. Then my father. Then Nolan again. By bedtime, I had 11 missed calls and 4 texts, none of which answered the question I had asked. That told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, I began writing the formal withdrawal notice that ended my role in all of it. Not because I wanted revenge. Because once someone keeps using your credibility after you have clearly withdrawn it, silence becomes participation. And I was done participating. I wrote the withdrawal notice on a Friday night at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my phone turned face down, and a legal pad beside me. I kept it short on purpose. No emotion. No family history. No accusations I could not support. Just dates, scope, and boundaries. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing from all informal and formal review, documentation support, vendor coordination, lender packet assistance, permit tracking, insurance follow-up, and compliance-related guidance connected to Mercer Residential Group, associated property files, and any family-managed real estate matters. I added one more paragraph that mattered even more. My name, formatting structures, review language, document controls, and prior internal checklists may not be used, referenced, or implied as current support, oversight, or approval after the date and time of this notice. Then I included the timestamp. Friday, April 11th, 7:30 a.m. I addressed it to Nolan, my father, the outside bookkeeper, and Sheila Benton at the lending office. I read it once, then again, and scheduled it. When the email went out the next morning, I was already awake. At 7:34 a.m., Nolan called. I let it ring. At 7:41 a.m., my father called. I let that ring too. At 7:52 a.m., my mother sent a text. Please do not embarrass the family over a misunderstanding. That word again. Misunderstanding. It was never a misunderstanding when they needed my work. It only became a misunderstanding when I objected to how it was being used. At 8:06 a.m., Sheila Benton replied to everyone. Thank you for the clarification. We will remove any reference suggesting current third-party documentation review and request revised materials directly from the borrower. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because it did 2 things at once. It protected me, and it exposed the fact that my name had been helping hold that package together more than Nolan had admitted. At 8:19 a.m., Nolan finally sent a text instead of calling. You didn't have to copy the lender. I answered with 8 words. Yes, I did. That was the point. That was the last non-essential text I sent him for weeks. The rest I handled in writing only, and only when necessary. By noon that day, my father had left 3 voicemails. The first was angry. The second was controlled. The third was trying to sound reasonable. That progression was familiar. First, I was ungrateful. Then I was rigid. Then I was overreacting to stress. I saved all 3 and documented the times. At 12:43 p.m., My mother emailed me instead of texting, which meant she wanted to sound measured. Her message was 4 paragraphs of soft language built around one idea. Nolan was under pressure, my father was disappointed, and maybe I could have handled this more privately. I noticed what was missing. No one denied using my review structure after I withdrew. No one denied representing my involvement more broadly than I had authorized. No one denied that my name had been useful until the moment I stopped offering it. That silence told me more than anything they actually wrote. I answered my mother at 1:08 p.m. For clarity, this was handled privately multiple times before I sent a formal notice. I am not available for further discussion by phone. If there is a specific factual correction to anything in my notice, send it in writing. She never sent one. That afternoon, I started removing myself from everything else that still connected me to their systems. Not emotionally. Operationally. I disabled access to the folder templates I had built on my personal cloud storage. I removed automated reminder rules tied to Nolan's certificate renewals. I archived the permit tracker copy I had been maintaining for my own reference. I exported my email history into a separate folder labeled Family Documentation. I changed the passwords on 2 old accounts my father had once used to send me scanned files. I wrote down every active item I believed might still be relying on work I had done. There were more than I expected. A roofing dispute on 1 duplex. A pending inspection correction. 2 contractor renewals. A revised draw request. 1 tax mailing issue. A rent deposit log my father barely understood, but had been relying on for months. And the lender package, of course, sitting at the center of all of it. When I finished the list, I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph. Relief. For years, I had been carrying a level of family administrative responsibility no one had ever formally assigned me, and everyone had quietly assumed would continue forever. Now it had an end date. Saturday evening, Teresa called me. She did not ask whether I had gone through with it. She knew me well enough to hear it in my voice. How bad is the fallout? Predictable, I said. She laughed softly. That usually means worse than you're saying. I told her about Sheila's response, the voicemails, my mother's email, and the fact that no one had actually disputed the core issue. Teresa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Leave everything in writing." People who rely on vagueness hate written clarity because it removes their ability to revise the story later. That sentence stayed with me. Revise the story later. My family was very good at that. If a problem got fixed, they remembered it as teamwork. If I raised a concern, they remembered it as tension. If I set a limit, they remembered it as rejection. Written records interrupted that pattern. So I kept creating them. By Sunday morning, Nolan had switched from anger to urgency. His email came in at 9:12 a.m. with the subject line, "Need one quick answer." I almost laughed when I saw it. "Need one quick answer" had been the opening line to at least 50 family problems over the years. His message was short. "Sheila is asking whether the revised insurance binder resolves the issue. I'm not asking you to review the whole thing. Just tell me if this version is enough." I did not answer the question he asked. I answered the one that mattered. For my formal notice, I am not reviewing documents, commenting on sufficiency, or advising on submissions. Please direct questions to your lender or legal counsel. He replied 7 minutes later. "You're really doing this?" I did not respond. Because yes, I was really doing this. For the first few days, that was the hardest part. Not the family anger. Not the guilt. Not even the fear that something large might collapse. The hardest part was refusing the familiar role. I was used to solving. Used to clarifying. Used to stepping in at the last minute and preventing the consequences from landing. Now I had to sit still and let reality continue without me cushioning it. That takes more discipline than people think. On Monday morning, the outside bookkeeper emailed asking whether she should continue using the file naming logic I had originally created for project packets. I appreciated that question because it was direct and professional. I answered directly, "No. Please create a new internal file structure not associated with my prior review process. My framework should not be used to imply current oversight or continuity of support." 20 minutes later, she replied, "Understood. Simple. Clean. No drama. That contrast was impossible to miss. The people outside my family adjusted immediately when given a clear boundary. The people inside it treated clarity like betrayal. By Tuesday, the calls slowed down, but the pressure changed shape. My father stopped calling directly and started sending messages through my mother. Your father says this has gone far enough. Your father says the lender is reading too much into this. Your father says families should not communicate like hostile parties. I almost responded to that last one. Then I stopped myself. Because hostile parties do not usually spend years quietly protecting each other from avoidable consequences. What my father meant was that families should not document the point where unpaid usefulness ends. By Wednesday afternoon, the first real crack appeared. Sheila Benton sent a new message requesting a revised package, updated supporting documents, and clarification on prior references to third-party review controls. That language mattered. Third-party review controls. That was lender language for exactly what I had suspected. My presence, or the impression of my presence, had been functioning as a confidence signal in the file. Nolan forwarded the email to me with one line above it. Happy now? I read it once, then again, then archived it without answering. No, I was not happy. I was just no longer willing to be used as invisible support for a structure that wanted my credibility, but not my voice. By the end of that week, I had 23 missed calls, 14 text messages, 9 emails, and a small stack of printed notes on my desk documenting exactly how quickly concern had turned into pressure once my labor stopped being available. That Friday, 1 week after the dinner where my father told me to step away, my mother came to my apartment unannounced. She stood outside with a tight smile and a bakery box in her hands like this was still the kind of situation sugar could smooth over. I did not invite her in immediately. I stepped into the hallway and closed the apartment door behind me. She noticed that. Her expression changed, just slightly. I brought lemon cake, she said. That was unnecessary. Marin, please. I let her finish before answering. She told me everyone was exhausted. Nolan was trying his best. My father felt blindsided, and maybe I could meet with them quietly and clear things up before this became something permanent. Something permanent. What she meant was visible. I asked her one question. Was my name still being used after I withdrew the first time? She looked at me for one full second too long. Then she said, I don't know the technical side of what Nolan sent. That was not an answer. So I asked it again. Was my name, my review language, or my structure still being used after I said no? She shifted the bakery box from one hand to the other. You know how your brother is. He probably didn't think. I stopped her there. No, he thought. He just decided it was acceptable. She looked genuinely hurt when I said that, which almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Then she said the sentence that ended the visit. You've always been so good at cleaning things up. I don't understand why you're choosing this moment to stop. That was it. There it was. Not because it was wrong. Not because it put me at risk. Not because it crossed a line. Why this moment? As if stopping was the strange part. As if the years before it had been natural. I said, very calmly, because you all got too comfortable mistaking my usefulness for consent. She stared at me. Then she started crying quietly, which in my family usually meant the conversation was about to shift away from facts and toward feelings. I did not let it. I said, if there is something specific you want to correct in writing, send it. Otherwise, I'm done discussing this. I took the bakery box from her hands, thanked her for bringing it, and went back inside. I did not eat the cake. I put it on the counter and stood there looking at it for a long time. By then I understood something very clearly. The cutoff moment had already happened. The withdrawal was real, and the panic phase had started. The family still thought this was a mood. They were about to learn it was a system change. The following Monday, the first call came from someone who was not family. It was Sheila Benton. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered because I wanted to hear the wording directly. She was professional, careful, and more direct than anyone in my family had been. She said the lender had paused the package pending clarification on document controls, insurance support, and prior statements about outside review. Then she asked a simple question. Were you functioning in any formal advisory capacity to Mercer Residential Group? No, I said. There was a short silence. Then she asked, were materials submitted using a structure or review language associated with your prior work? Yes, I said. Before and, as far as I can document, after I withdrew informal support. She thanked me. Not warmly, just clearly. Then she said they would proceed based on direct borrower documentation only. I documented the time the moment the call ended. 9:18 a.m. At 10:07 a.m., Nolan called. At 10:09 a.m., my father called. At 10:14 a.m., my mother texted, "What did you tell her?" I answered only once. I confirmed the facts. That was enough to trigger the next stage. The messages stopped sounding offended and started sounding afraid. Nolan sent 3 in a row. You didn't have to say it like that. You made it sound worse. This can still be fixed if you stop escalating. I read all 3 and answered with one sentence. I did not escalate anything. I stopped being misrepresented. By noon, my father finally sent an email instead of calling. That usually meant one of 2 things. Either he wanted a record he could point to later, or he had realized the situation was serious enough to control his tone. This time it was both. He wrote that I had taken a family misunderstanding into a professional arena and harmed Nolan's financing process over language choices. He said the lender was now overreacting because I had been too rigid and too literal. Too literal. That phrase would have irritated me more if it had not been so revealing. Because documents are supposed to be literal. Representations are supposed to be literal. Approval is supposed to be literal. When people accuse you of being too literal in a situation built on records, what they usually mean is this: you stopped helping them blur the line. I answered at 12:26 p.m. There is no misunderstanding about whether my name, review structure, and prior support were used after withdrawal. If you believe any factual statement in my notice was incorrect, send the correction in writing with specifics. He never sent one. That afternoon, the outside bookkeeper emailed Nolan and copied me by mistake again. She was asking for updated source files because the expense summary did not reconcile to the banked activity previously provided. That sentence mattered. Did not reconcile, meaning the numbers no longer lined up cleanly enough for someone outside the family to ignore. Nolan unsent nothing, corrected nothing, explained nothing. He called me instead. I let it ring. Then came the voicemail. Marin, this is insane. I'm asking you as my sister to stop doing this. We are in the middle of closing timelines. Dad is furious. Mom is crying. If you just clarify that you are helping informally, that should be enough. I listened to it once, then again. Then I saved it into the folder marked family documentation. The line that stayed with me was not Mom is crying. It was if you just clarify that you were helping informally. Because even then, with the file under review and the lender stepping back, he still wanted my credibility. He just wanted it in softer language. He did not want truth. He wanted insulation. By Wednesday, the pressure moved outside the lender file. A roofing vendor emailed my father about an overdue insurance renewal. The town inspection office sent a follow-up correction notice on one of the duplexes. The rent deposit log my father had been relying on started showing gaps because I was no longer reconciling the manual entries he had been making incorrectly. Small things on their own. Not dramatic. Not catastrophic. Just the ordinary consequences of weak systems no longer being quietly reinforced. That is what most collapses look like in real life. Not one explosion. 6 manageable problems arriving at the same time after the one person who used to catch them stops doing that. Thursday night, my Aunt Denise called. That was new. My family only involved extended relatives when they wanted social pressure without direct accountability. Denise said she didn't know all the details, but hated seeing everyone so tense. She said my father felt humiliated, Nolan was overwhelmed, and maybe I could sit down with them all together and talk this out before people said things they could not take back. I asked her one question. Did anyone tell you my name was still being used after I withdrew support? She hesitated. That was enough. Then she said, I think there may have been some confusion. I thanked her for calling and ended the conversation. That silence after her answer told me the family version of events was already moving outward. They were trying to rewrite the timeline before the facts settled. So I stayed with the facts. On Friday morning, I received an email from a real estate attorney named Matthew Klein, copied to Nolan and my father. He represented one of the private parties tied to the redevelopment transaction. His message was concise and careful. He requested confirmation that I was not currently engaged in document review, compliance support, record preparation, or advisory oversight for any file associated with the listed properties. He also asked whether references to my involvement in prior materials should be understood as historical only. I appreciated the clarity. I replied 15 minutes later. Correct. I am not currently engaged in any such capacity. Any prior involvement was limited, informal, and withdrawn in writing. No current materials should represent or imply my review, oversight, or approval. That email changed the tone permanently. Because once lawyers start asking clean questions, families lose the ability to hide inside vague language. Nolan called 3 times in 6 minutes. Then my father sent the message I had been expecting for days. Come to dinner Sunday. We are ending this face-to-face. Not discussing. Not addressing. Ending. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, I will attend if this is a factual discussion and not a pressure meeting. He answered almost immediately. Be there at 6. I spent Saturday printing documents. Not everything. Only what mattered. The first withdrawal email. The lender thread referring to me as a documentation consultant. My written clarification. The revised file screenshots using my review structure after I had already said no. My father's emails. Nolan's texts. The timeline summary with dates, times, and subject lines. Nothing dramatic. Just enough that nobody at the table could pretend they were confused. Sunday evening, I arrived at my brother's house at 5:56 p.m. I carried one slim folder and a legal pad. My mother opened the door with the expression people use at funerals when they are trying to look composed for neighbors. The dining room was already set. My father sat at the head of the table. Nolan sat to his right. His wife, Erin, sat quietly at the far end. My mother stayed standing for a few seconds before finally sitting down. I placed the folder beside my plate and did not take off my coat right away. No one touched the food. My father began the way I knew he would, with tone before facts. This has gone far enough. I let him finish. He said I had embarrassed the family, damaged Nolan's deal, involved outsiders unnecessarily, and turned support into a legal event. Then Nolan jumped in and said, you could have corrected this with one call. I looked at him and asked, corrected what exactly? He opened his mouth, then stopped. So I asked again, more quietly, what specific statement did I make that was false? Nobody answered. That silence told me I had the room. My father shifted in his seat and said, this isn't about false. It's about how you handled it. No, I said. It's about whether my name and work were used after I withdrew them. Then I opened the folder. I slid the first page across the table to Nolan. This is my withdrawal email from January 18th. The second page went to my father. This is the lender thread referring to me as your documentation consultant after that withdrawal. The third page stayed in front of me. These are screenshots showing my review structure still being used in revised materials. My mother looked down at the pages but did not touch them. Nolan's face changed first. Not anger exactly. Exposure. That look people get when they realize the version of events they have been rehearsing cannot survive paper. He said, I didn't think it mattered because you created the structure in the first place. I nodded once. That is the first honest thing anyone here has said to me in 2 weeks. My father inhaled sharply. Marin, I stopped him by raising one hand slightly. No, let's stay with the facts. Then I asked the question that had been sitting underneath everything from the start. Was my name still being used after I withdrew? Nolan looked at my father. My father looked at my mother. My mother stared at the table. Finally, Nolan said, not your name exactly. I held his gaze. My structure. My wording. My prior review implied as current. Yes or no? He looked down. Yes. No one spoke for a moment. Even Erin, who had been silent the entire evening, finally exhaled and leaned back like something in the room had become impossible to keep pretending about. My father tried to recover first. You are taking this in the harshest possible way. I answered calmly. No, I'm taking it in the most accurate way. Then I asked the question that punctured whatever image he had been trying to hold together. If the file was solid without me, why was my involvement useful enough to keep implying after I said no? That landed. No one had an answer because there was no harmless answer. If they admitted the file was weak, then I had been right. If they said my involvement did not matter, then there was no reason to keep using it. That is what quiet confrontation does when it works. It removes the comfortable exits. My mother started crying softly, but even she did not interrupt with the usual language about stress and family and tone. The documents were on the table. The facts were sitting there in black and white. Feelings had nowhere to hide them now. Nolan finally said, "I just needed the deal to get through." I looked at him for a long second. "And you thought that gave you the right to keep borrowing my credibility after I withdrew it?" He did not answer. He did not need to. The whole room understood. Once Nolan said it out loud, the room changed. Not because anyone suddenly understood me in some deep emotional way. That would be too neat. Families like mine do not transform in a single dinner. It changed because the truth had finally become specific. Not vague. Not tension. Not miscommunication. Not, you know how family is. Specific. He needed the deal to go through. My credibility made the file look safer than it was. He used it anyway. My father was the first to try to reorganize the damage. He leaned back in his chair, looked at the papers again, and said, "Fine. Mistakes were made. But destroying the whole thing over this helps no one." I remember that sentence clearly because it told me exactly what he still believed. That I was the one destroying something. Not the person who had misrepresented my involvement. Not the years of weak process underneath it. Me. I closed the folder and said, "I didn't destroy anything. I stopped covering it." That was the sentence I should have said years earlier. My mother looked at me like I had become someone unfamiliar. Maybe I had. Or maybe I had just stopped playing the role they were used to. Then she asked, very quietly, "So what happens now?" I answered her the same way I would have answered anyone in a professional setting. "Now you operate without me." I said it calmly. No edge. No performance. Then I made 3 things clear. I would not review another document. I would not speak to lenders, vendors, inspectors, or attorneys on behalf of anyone in the family. And I would not allow my name, wording, or prior work product to be used in any current or future file. I also told them that if anything surfaced later with my review language attached after that night, I would respond in writing the same way I already had. My father said, "You'd really do that to your own family?" I looked at him and said, "You are still asking the wrong question." That silence told me he knew I was right. He just did not like what being right cost him. I stood up, put the papers back into the folder, thanked Aaron for staying out of it, and left. No one followed me to the door. That mattered too. The first real consequence arrived 12 days later. The private lending arrangement did not close. Not because I called anyone. Not because I campaigned against Nolan. Not because I tried to embarrass the family. It failed because once the file had to stand on its own, it could not carry the weight they had placed on it. The lender requested revised support, tighter reconciliation, cleaner contractor records, and confirmation of project costs that Nolan could not produce on the timeline required. Without that funding, 2 of the renovation schedules stalled. 1 contractor walked. Another demanded updated payment terms in writing before returning to the site. Then the smaller consequences started stacking. My father missed a renewal window on one of the duplex insurance endorsements and had to pay a higher corrected premium. The inspection issue on the older property dragged on because the follow-up paperwork was incomplete. The rent deposit records grew messy enough that the outside bookkeeper insisted on a new system and refused to work from handwritten notes anymore. One vendor dispute that I normally would have resolved in 20 minutes sat unresolved for almost 3 weeks. None of it looked dramatic from the outside. That is how real collapse usually works. A deal delayed. A premium increased. A file kicked back. A contractor gone cold. A person who used to make 10 quiet corrections no longer making them. Reality catching up. Nolan tried 2 more times during that first month. The first was an email at 11:07 p.m. with the subject line, "Can we reset?" He wrote that he knew he had handled some things badly, but wanted me to understand how much pressure he had been under. He said Dad had been pushing him, the lender had been difficult, and he had never meant to use me. That word was in quotation marks, which told me he still did not fully accept it. I did not answer. The second time was a handwritten note mailed to my apartment. Short. No excuses. Just this. I should have stopped when you first said no. That one I kept. I still did not answer, but I kept it because it was the first thing he sent that sounded like a fact instead of a strategy. My father never apologized directly. He sent one email 6 weeks later after it became clear the redevelopment plan was not recovering on the original timeline. It said, "We may have relied on you too heavily and failed to show proper appreciation." That was the closest he could get. Even then, the wording was careful in the way people use when they want to acknowledge impact without fully admitting choice. May have, too heavily, failed to show appreciation, as if the problem was gratitude and not entitlement. I did not answer that one either. My mother tried a different route. She sent messages about ordinary things. A recipe, a photo of spring flowers, a reminder that my cousin's son had made honor roll. Nothing about the documents. Nothing about the dinner. Nothing about the lender. For a while, I found that more painful than the conflict itself. It was another way of revising the story. If she could return to normal topics quickly enough, maybe normal had never really been broken. I responded only when necessary, and even then briefly. Over time, the distance became real. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. And once it was real, something unexpected happened. I got calmer. My evenings became my own again. My phone stopped carrying that low-level dread of what half-finished problem might be waiting for me after work. I stopped checking family emails before bed. I stopped waking up already braced for someone else's administrative emergency. For years, I had called that responsibility. Once it was gone, I could finally see how much of it had really been unpaid vigilance. About 4 months after the dinner, I started looking seriously at buying a house. I had been saving for years, but some part of me had always acted as if I needed to remain flexible for family needs. Close enough to help. Available enough to step in. Financially cautious enough to absorb whatever surprise might land next. Without that role, the math changed. I met with a lender of my own, pulled my records, reviewed my budget, and started looking at smaller homes east of Durham. I wanted something clean, quiet, manageable. Not impressive. Just mine. I found it in late September. A 2-bedroom brick townhouse with a small fenced patio, decent natural light, and a kitchen that needed almost nothing. The inspection report was refreshingly boring. A few minor fixes, one aging water heater, nothing structural. I still remember sitting at the closing table and feeling how different that paperwork felt from everything I had done for my family. No blurred roles. No hidden expectations. No one quietly assuming my labor came attached. Just my name on documents that belonged to my own life. I closed on the townhouse 3 weeks before my 35th birthday. I bought myself a plain brass key hook for the entry wall the day I moved in. Nothing sentimental. Just useful. But I remember standing there with the little box in my hand and realizing that for the first time in years, useful no longer felt like a trap. Around that same time, I also helped someone, but not through my family. Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived across from my old apartment for years, was in her 70s and had recently lost her husband. She was trying to sort through insurance mail, utility transfers, and a property tax issue she did not fully understand. She asked me one evening in the hallway if I knew what a certain notice meant. I did. So I helped her. Not by taking over everything. Not by becoming her system. Just by sitting with her twice, explaining the letters, helping her make a call list, and writing down what needed to be sent where. She thanked me 3 separate times and brought me a container of Arroz con pollo the next day. That difference mattered. She asked. She listened. She appreciated the help. And when the immediate issue was resolved, she did not quietly convert my support into permanent access. That is what healthy help feels like. Limited. Clear. Mutual in respect, even when not equal in skill. A few months later, my mother asked if I would come to Christmas Eve dinner. I thought about it for a day before answering. Then I said no, not angrily, just honestly. I wrote, I'm not ready to return to family gatherings. I wish everyone a peaceful holiday. She replied, I understand. I am still not sure whether she truly did, but the sentence was enough. Nolan sends a message once in a while now, usually brief, usually neutral, updates about things that no longer ask anything from me. I respond occasionally, but only when I want to and never about his business. My father and I speak rarely. When we do, the conversations are careful, polite, narrow. There is no warmth in them, but there is also no more presumption. He asks nothing about files, contracts, renewals, or what I think some document means. That role is gone. And that is the actual ending of this story. Not revenge. Not ruin. Not some dramatic final punishment. Just the end of access. People sometimes think boundaries are about forcing others to finally understand your worth. In my experience, they are not. Some people will never understand your worth in a generous way. They will only understand your absence in a practical one. That still counts, because usefulness and worth are not the same thing. A person can depend on your skills and still fail to value you. A person can praise your reliability and still feel entitled to it. A family can call you difficult the moment you stop making their life easier. None of that changes what your labor is worth. None of that makes your boundaries cruel. And none of that means you owe continued access to people who only feel your importance when your support is removed. The price of boundaries is usually discomfort first. Awkward silence. Angry messages. Stories told about you that are easier for other people to live within the truth. But after that comes something better. Clarity. Space. A life that is actually yours. That is what I have now. A quiet home. A job I am respected in. A phone that no longer controls my nervous system. And enough distance to help when I truly choose to, not when guilt demands it. If you are listening to this and you've spent years being the reliable one, the organized one, the person everyone calls after they have already ignored the details, I hope you hear this clearly. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to require accuracy. You are allowed to refuse borrowed credibility. And you are allowed to build a life where your value is not measured only by how much trouble you can prevent for other people. If this story felt familiar, tell me where you're listening from and what part hit you hardest.